Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to get this afternoon session underway. My name is Tim Carlson. I am the Executive Director of the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy, a long title, IPHE. The IPHE is an intergovernmental organization. 18 countries and the European Commission are members, and we focus on trying to help accelerate the development and deployment of fuel cells and hydrogen in the economy around the world. So it's my pleasure this afternoon to moderate this session. The question here is the role for electrification of fuels and focusing on hydrogen and renewable power. I commented earlier that much of the focus at the various events that we've been at so far have focused on the grid structure, the issues around regulatory alliance, the technology applications, etc., with a thinking toward the grid. This afternoon's conversation broadens that, and it was referenced to briefly in this morning's plenary session, where the electrons may be used differently across the economy, and so this is part of that conversation. Some housekeeping. I would like to flag for everybody to have their app out, Attendify, and to please pose questions. We will be drawing from the question profile for the Q&A session that will follow the introduction of all the panelists and their initial interventions on their behalf. So we'll use the questions and answers, questions from you. We will also be running a poll, and the sequencing of the poll, there'll be 4 questions, and we'll run the poll just after the first presentation by IRENA, and then we'll run it at the end of the session and see if there's been any delta or any changes. With that, I think I'd like to pass it over to IRENA and to make a presentation on their latest documentation and report. And I think that this is a very important first step for the fuel cell and hydrogen sector in the recognition by IRENA of the opportunities that hydrogen can and will play in the energy and in the economy in the future. So, Emmanuel, the floor is yours.
So good afternoon, everyone. And today I would like to briefly introduce the report we are launching exactly today at Innovation Week about hydrogen from renewable power. You can find a copy after the session just outside of the room. This report, as Tim mentioned, tries to ask a few questions about the role of hydrogen coming from an intergovernmental organization with global membership that is in charge of deployment of renewables. So there's many angles to hydrogen. We are taking a very specific one. So the main question is, what is today happening that makes hydrogen important for renewables, and how do they play together in the energy transition? So just to ask the same question we ask ourselves, why we are looking at hydrogen in this context is what has changed in the last few years about hydrogen. So there's been a very big momentum about hydrogen about 15 years ago. It got a little bit quiet, and now it's again a very hot topic, but the context is very different. So number one, the Paris Agreement is in place. We have to decarbonize our economies, and we have some challenges in some of the sectors to be able to do so. So that the energy transition has been so far a very big success story for the power sector, not so much so for the other sectors. Additionally, some of the sectors are particularly difficult to decarbonize. This is not so much a technical question, but it's an economics question. So there are sectors that require very high intensity of energy, possibly not stationary, some stationary, and typically have access to very low-cost options to provide such services. So the question we've been asking ourselves is hydrogen potentially the missing link to close this gap between the sectors that have relatively affordable energy and high energy intensity and trying to decarbonize the economy as a whole. So can this be a link between the successful story in the power sector and the end-use sectors? So just to put the situation into context, so where we are today, hydrogen is not at research stage. It's been deployed for many, many years for very specific reasons. They're up on the screen, so it's clearly a very important feedstock. If you think about pretty much everything we eat, there is ammonia as a fertilizer, and that comes from hydrogen. So number one, hydrogen exists today, is almost 10 exajoule. If you put it into context, the whole energy demand for a world is 450, so it's significant, and it's already being deployed for decades. Second point, it's coming half of it from natural gas, significant share from oil and coal, and only 4% from electrolysis. Electrolysis means from electricity to an electrolyzer to hydrogen. It doesn't mean the electricity is renewable. So we are saying that the ceiling at the moment is 4% of this 10 exajoule can be switched to renewables with the existing infrastructure. So we're saying we need a significant change in pathways if we want to get there. How would it look like, looking at 2050, to connect the power system to the end-use sectors through hydrogen? So this chart up there we produced for a report. That was supposed to be a pointer. Well, there's no pointer. Anyways, the chart there shows the power system in two different set of icons. So the grid and renewables more in an off-grid context. So dedicated facilities that could produce hydrogen without having to rely on the grid. These are two quite different propositions. We'll look very briefly at both. And the main point there is that hydrogen can feed, once past the electrolyzer, into very diverse supply chain. This is a little bit beyond what we're trying to address with this report today. We're trying to focus on what are the best pathways and what is the potential for producing the hydrogen through electrolysis from renewables. So this is the statement and confining a little bit the scope. So once out from the electrolyzer, what is that we need to decarbonize that we might have challenges without? Transport, definitely fuel cell, electric vehicles, and this means not only passenger cars, it means trucks, buses, are complementary to a more, let's say, city car, battery electric vehicle proposition. They are not alternatives in our view. The technical maturity is approaching, so compared to when we first looked at it 15 years ago, the fuel cell have come a long way. And of course, the other good story is that this is electric propulsion, and this is applicable to most of the sectors, with the exception probably of aviation at the moment. So maritime is anyway switching towards electrification of the propulsion system. The rail is largely electrified, and the proposition is to further electrify where there is no catenary. And the road, of course, we know all the passenger cars running on hydrogen, and we will discuss that during the panel. Another pathway is to replace fuels with synthetic alternatives. So you go electricity, hydrogen, and then you add some carbon, and you have fuels that can be switched without any change in the end use. And then finally, the difficult one is industry. Industry needs feedstock, industry needs high temperature heat, and industry has been benefiting from very low price fuels to do so. So the question is, can hydrogen be filling this gap? And another very important angle, and we will hear more about it later, is decarbonizing the gas grid. So to a certain extent, there is infrastructure in place that can be used to feed hydrogen today, but to a certain limit. And that is a very complex question, and there's different ways of producing this hydrogen to feed into the grid. But there are certainly synergies between different business models that could be combined. So I will skip very briefly through this. So there's quite a few pieces of homework that needs to be falling into place in a sequence. So what do we see based on this very initial assessment is that there needs to be, the chicken and the egg problem has to be solved. So we have to start from somewhere, and we see that the need for a significant and stable demand needs to be in place to trigger economies of scale and reduce cost. Additionally, we see that once this is in place, there is a potential, and this is where the interplay between variable renewables, which is the cross-cutting theme of this week, and hydrogen is very important. It could be a significant enabler for additional renewables into the power system. And this could be done jointly between injecting into gas grid and providing directly hydrogen to other sectors while facilitating additional deployment of renewables in the power sector. And then finally, the two models we've been focusing on is the on-site production, so trying to get the electricity to where you need the hydrogen at scale and produce the hydrogen on-site. This is mostly happening to steam methane reforming today, so you don't bring electricity, you bring natural gas. And so to do it through the cable instead of doing through the pipe. And the other model is quite the opposite. Go to the best renewable resources, make sure you have a nice business case for producing extremely low-cost hydrogen, and then somehow emulate what the LNG success story has been, but with hydrogen. There's challenges on the way. We will hear more about it in the panel. Just a couple of pictures to put it into context. Green hydrogen, so hydrogen from renewable energy, is not only through electrolysis. We are narrowing down the focus to electrolysis because electrolysis is established. There's a series of improvements coming to market, but it's in place. You see the picture there is showing that that was not a new technology already last century. And just to mention, there's other pathways that could, through a technology breakthrough, be significant. So for instance, in mission innovation, there is a specific challenge looking at hydrogen and another one looking at solar fuels. And this is quite significant because there are other pathways that might provide significant opportunities to scale up the role of renewables in producing hydrogen beyond what we already discussed. And of course, biomass is another pathway. We ran a few numbers. These are preliminary numbers to set the scene for the next report that will be released next year, where we look at flexibility in the power system through hydrogen production. This is the first round of numbers about levelized cost of hydrogen. And here we are looking at a business case connected to the grid. So what you see in these charts is the alkaline above and the so-called PEM electrolyzer, so more flexible type of electrolyzer, connected to, let's say, a high renewable, a high wind in particular, high wind power system. In this case, we are looking at the price duration curve of Denmark. And what is to be considered there, you might have very low prices for certain hours of the year, but that is not the case throughout the year. Additionally, you have to depreciate and recover the cost for the investment you make in the electrolyzer. So there are trade-offs there about what's the optimal utilization rate for the electrolyzer. So we looked at how this influenced the levelized cost of hydrogen. So the load factor should be high, but doesn't have to be 100%. At one point, it balances out and gets fairly flat. And we put a target price there. The target price means a reasonable production cost to which you have to add the supply chain. What is in addition for the proton exchange membrane electrolyzer, and that's why it's particularly interesting for variable renewables integration, is the availability of flexibility to be provided to the system while you produce hydrogen. And that is something we will look a bit more in detail in the next study. But what you see in the charts is there is a dotted line that tries to show what could be the value for such additional services. And so if you can capture that value, which is a question mark, if you can capture that value, you can much easier reach a break-even to the point to which the blue line in 2025, without capturing this value, will not break even. But if you are able to capture the value of flexibility, and that is a market design question to a large extent, then you might be able to accelerate the competitiveness of hydrogen and have it at lower load factors and have it earlier in time. The other business model is the off-grid model. So we've been looking at the best resources, and so very high capacity factor solar, high capacity factor PV, and a combination of the two. So how do we find resources that are renewable resources that are available most of the year, at the same time at a very low levelized cost of electricity? And so what we found there is that the importance of the full load hours, so the importance of using the electrolyzer many hours of the year becomes very significant in the off-grid context, more than on the on-grid context, because the price is flat. While on-grid, you assume you're getting the lowest prices first. When you're off-grid and the price is flat, then it becomes very important to make sure you're running your electrolyzer not just a few hours during the sunny part of the day, but as much as possible, or at least 60, 70, 80% of the time. These are the two production pathways we looked at, and what does it mean for a potential? I kind of introduced that at the very beginning. So in a 450 exajoule energy system, our 2050 analysis today sees an economic potential, so economic potential, not technical, of about 8 exajoule in 2050. We might see this growing through reduction in cost or relooking at some of the assumptions in the future, but in principle, with the current numbers we are running, is looking like heavy transport might be the main beneficiary. And this is not a technical issue, it's a more general cost issue. So do we have a price of carbon? If yes, how much? And that could change, for instance, the story for industry significantly. And then there we have a comparison from the Hydrogen Council that had a very close look at it, and they identified, without the feedstocks, a potential of about 57 exajoule in 2050. So the point here is there is a range between economical and more technical potential, and the range is not as wide as one might think. We're talking 2050 here, and that's many things that can change. But the order of magnitude we are seeing is anywhere in between 10 and 100, and that is quite wide. And cost reduction would be the main driver to change this number towards the 100. And then getting towards the end, one slide that I think has been, or one chart that has been quoted quite a bit in the past, is looking into the details, and I know Dan will do it much better than me later on, but I'm just touching upon the question about what does it take to get more hydrogen into the natural gas grid, and so slowly decarbonizing it. And the question is not as simple as one might think. There's quite a few things you need to look at. This is the German Water and Gas Association that had a very close look at every single component of the grid and looked at which components are the bottleneck, what needs to be done to release that bottleneck and increase the share of hydrogen into the gas grid. And so it is not a simple question. We are not aiming to get into that space. We're just trying to see what could be done with existing situation on the gas grid, what could be taken into the gas grid if some measures are put in place, and so what is the volume we're talking about. So if you're thinking about the storage for seasonal variability of renewable energy generation and demand, so for instance, how to use solar in summer to supply heat in winter, well, the gas grid is storing 1,200 terawatt hours of electricity in Europe, of energy, sorry. So that could be renewable electricity or something else. However, 100% of this being hydrogen is a big challenge. So every time you have 1 unit of hydrogen, you need to have a few units of natural gas together with it. So if you're talking decarbonization, there are a few question marks there. And then finally, a couple of words about the supply chain. We talked about production mostly, so we're targeting $1 to $3 a kilogram, depending who you ask, for production. And so this means a relatively low price of electricity to come in and a very high utilization rate of the electrolyzer. And then the big question marks are on the supply chain. So depending on the approach you take, if you're producing at the gate of the factory, then you don't have much to add. If you want to ship it on the other side of the world, that's quite a bit of technical and economic challenges on the way. So the question is, what time can you have, what price can you have at the pump for transportation, and what time can you have at the factory gate for industry? So there's been a pattern in the past for non-renewable hydrogen, and the question is this the same supply chain we will see? Because with the electrolyzer, you can decide where you stop the cable and where you start the pipe, or the trailer of the liquefied hydrogen ship, and that is something that needs quite a lot of work still to understand what the different pathways look like and which ones are more competitive. And this is my final slide. we tried to map some recommendations for policymakers in the different areas. So challenges and enabling measures. So I definitely expect that this will be revised after the panel discussion today. So hopefully our speakers will give us additional suggestions on what they felt as a key challenge and what do they see as potential solutions that policymakers should be looking at in the next few years. And we will run also a poll about it to see how to resolve some of these challenges. So main point is technology is ready or close to ready. What we need is to push down the cost significantly. So we need scale. So what do we need to do? Probably large-scale application to start with. So building these economies of scale in the whole supply chain, that is the challenge. It's not just the electrolyzer, not just renewables. So renewables now are at scale. Electrolyzers are growing in scale, but still at the beginning of the scaling up. And the demand from large industry is orders of magnitude larger than typically one would expect when looking at the energy balances. So one facility can consume more than a country easily. So stable and supportive policy framework to encourage investment is crucial, also to solve the chicken and the egg problem. So investment should flow, making sure that this will stay as a policy framework where hydrogen has a role to play. And instruments to trigger demand from consumers are equally important, because at one point there will be sectors with limited options, and if the end user will request to have green hydrogen as a fuel, there will be a pull from the consumer side as well. And this is all I had to say, and I look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Okay, we'd like to kick off the session now. I would ask that everybody get out their Attendify, go to the Q&A section, and start thinking about your questions. But also, I would ask that you now go to, hopefully it's set up, to go to the polls. So there's a Q&A side, and you can go to the polls folder. Click on the polls folder, and there will be a question. What do you see as the most important role for hydrogen from renewable in 10 years? So, oh, it's all 0%. Okay. So you pick one. I think we'll have to click through, I guess, as we go along. So there you are. So we've only had, I guess, 3. We're getting 4. So we'll give you 30 seconds, or I'll count to 10, and then we'll move on. There's a series of questions, and we'll get your views on your perceptions here. I'm just speculating the size of the room. We've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 40, 80, 90 people. So half, can we get to half, 40, 45? Okay, maybe that's giving us a signal there. Okay, can we move to the next question, please? Oh, perfect. In 20 years' time. So the last one was 10 years, this is 20 years. While you're doing that, I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown. What we'll do, we have an excellent panel set up for this afternoon. We'll start with government representatives first. Then we'll have 2 representatives from funding agencies on behalf of governments. And then we will have industry representatives providing their perspectives on the role for hydrogen. Okay, great. We're starting to get our numbers. Next question, please. Next poll question. How much of the total renewable electricity generation do you expect will be dedicated to hydrogen production in 10 years? As you heard from Emmanuel, right now, electrolysis is 4%. Of that electrolysis, probably it is a minuscule percent that is actually generated from renewable energy. So what do you see in 10 years' time? And the next question will be in 20 years' time. And we're going to run this poll just before we close and see if there's been a change in views. Okay, and Okay, we're getting good numbers there. Let's move on. So this one, same question, but longer time frame. Yeah, okay. All right, that's great. Thank you very much, everybody. So we'll start the panel presentation, and I'll be calling up each panelist. They will be making their introductory comments, and then we'll be taking their seat, and we'll call them all up. And at the end of that, we'll have an open question and answer period, and I hope to start with key, enticing, and interesting questions from the audience. So with that, I would like to start with Hashimoto-san, Director General from the Commerce, Industry, and Labor Department at the Prefecture of Fukushima in Japan. Hashimoto-san, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kiyoshi Hashimoto, Director General of Commerce, Industry, and Labor Department at the Fukushima Prefecture Government. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be here for the presentation. Fukushima has received the warm support and encouragement from all over the world since the Great East Japan earthquake occurred in March 2011. I'd like to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude and appreciation to the international community as well as everyone attending here today. To start with, please let me introduce Fukushima very briefly. I came from Fukushima City for this occasion. It is located about 200 kilometers north of the capital, Tokyo. I'd like to introduce the progress of the introduction of renewable energies and the measures taken for realizing a hydrogen-based society in Fukushima. Please take a look at this chart. Fukushima has set a target to produce enough renewable energy to supply 100% to the energy demand in the prefecture by around 2040. As of 2016, the introduction rate of renewable energy in Fukushima has reached 28.2%. In Fukushima, not only PV, but also the number of wind, small hydropower, biomass, and binary power installations is steadily increasing. Next, I'd like to introduce the Fukushima Plan for a New Energy Society, which is a national plan launched in September 2016. This is a scheme to promote Fukushima as a leading region for new energy future. There are three perspectives: expanded introduction of renewable energy, modern construction of hydrogen-based society, and building smart communities. On this occasion, please let me elaborate on some approaches toward modern construction of hydrogen-based society. This is a picture of the Fukushima Renewable Energy Institute, widely known as FUREA, established by the National Institute of Advanced Industrial Science and Technology. FREYR is Earth's global innovation hub concerning renewables, which also supports the development of renewable energy-related technologies with us. FREYR has an important part in developing human resources, industries, and made in Fukushima technologies. It also conducts research on the development of new technologies for the production, storage, and usage of hydrogen gained from renewable energies. Here we can see a picture of a commercial mobile hydrogen filling station with a subsidy from Fukushima Prefecture government. It was opened in March 2018, this year. A hydrogen stored at the station is produced from renewables, such as PV and wind, generated at facilities at FREYR. Lastly, I'd like to talk about a national project, a large-scale hydrogen production facility, Fukushima Hydrogen Energy Research Field in Namie Town. In this project, 10,000 kilowatt class hydrogen will be produced from PV, then transported and stored. The facility will produce enough hydrogen for around 560 fuel cell vehicles per day using renewable energy. It also aims to expand the use of renewables by using a new control system to coordinate overall operation of the hydrogen energy system, the power grid control system, and the hydrogen demand forecast system. We have studied and discussed how to utilize the hydrogen produced at this site in Fukushima. For example, Fukushima-made hydrogen will be used during the Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Games in 2020. Please come to Fukushima in 2020 when almost 10 years will have passed since the Great East Japan earthquake, to see how Fukushima has taken the challenge to realize a new energy society and to experience the progress of Fukushima's reconstruction. It would be our pleasure to welcome you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You could take your seat there. That would be great. Thank you. That's great. So just in case you hadn't noticed, in your app also is attached the presentations. So the slides, if you look under the speakers, you'll be able to also have a hard or a soft copy of the presentations that are made here. I just like to comment that I did visit Koriyama earlier in the spring and the Fukushima Renewable Energy Agency facility, and it's an impressive facility. That's so great. Good for you. I'd like to now call on Thomas to please come up. Thomas, Innovation and Entrepreneurial Manager for the Gabriel, which is Committee Solar for Chile. Thomas, you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much. I'm gonna try to explain very fast about what we're doing from Corfo. First of all, Corfo is a Chilean development bank, so it's a public agency that fosters innovation, R&D, and technological development. Here. And I work for the Solar Committee that is a part of this Corfo agency that we're focusing on solar energy and hydrogen produced from the north of Chile. So what is our innovation strategy? We started to think about what is first, what we have to first develop to foster hydrogen adoption in Chile. So it's the paradox of the chicken of the egg. So we know that you need one to foster the other. So we started, and we're thinking about introducing hydrogen in the industrial customer. You know, in the worldwide, ammonia represents 54% of the hydrogen production system, refinery 25%, and steel and glass 3%, and food industry 3%. So we can foster and try to, that industry start to adopting green hydrogen in their own process. That's the first thing. Then the north of Chile has this tremendous capacity to have the highest radiation in the planet, but as well, there's a huge industry of the mining industry, copper mining industry, who demand a lot of energy. So there, and I will show in the next slide, we're financing 2 R&D projects for dual combustion diesel hydrogen for big trucks and fuel cells, small trucks for mining too. And then we should aim, and this is the next stage, we should aim to energy storage using renewables, wind and solar. And in the second stage or long-term stage, we should aim to supply an international demand, an example of what Japan is thinking of. So we're very pleased to know what your intentions in hydrogen are today. This is the 2 projects. The first one, dual hydrogen diesel combustion for mining construction trucks. What Corfo does is make an open call, and this a consortium of those companies, the ones in the left, applied in a consortium to develop this dual hydrogen diesel combustion. They started this year, so they have a timeline of 5 years to develop and to prove that technology is working. And then another set of companies, they're working in fuel cells for trucks and mining, low work trucks for the mining. This is the first step. So they started working. Corfo is supervising these projects. And then we, as a public agency and technical agency, we try to put things further. So we worked with Tractable LNG, and we took 2 regions of the north of Chile, where the resource is and where the mining companies is, and we try to stress, well, with models, we stress the system, thinking what will happen if we have a 100% renewable energy system in those 2 regions. And what came out was a lot of business case. I can share you the document. It's today in Spanish. Next week will be uploaded in English. But they have a lot of good opportunities for business in the Chile case scenario. But what I want to share today is that the first analysis said that we can reach a levelized cost of energy by 2023 by $1.8 per kilogram of hydrogen. By 2035, up to or down to $1.3. This is in a good and low levelized cost scenario, and we have also a high levelized cost scenario. So, and then we saw that there's opportunity to develop this in Chile because as the report of IRENA recent today, there's a target about 5 or 3. So. And then we took those data and, well, what is the estimate levelized cost of energy today? So we took 2 technologies, PEM and alkaline electrolyzers, and combine it with PV and CSP. So CSP, you can design it by demand. If you need 24/7, you can design it that way. Or if you need peak loads, you can design CSP. It's very, very, very manageable. And PV, you should you install it and you use it during the day. So, given those restrictions and the capex and opex, we can reach as low as in today at 2.65. With alkaline technology and PV system, and producing just during the day because of the high capacity factor and the technology. And in 2025, we did the same exercise, and we can reach a price of around $265 US per kilograms, or from 265 to 169 dollars per kilogram for 2025 with the same technology, because we saw that it's economically more makes more sense to do a dedicated PV for production of hydrogen. So we're trying to bottle in the sun and work with you.
That's great. Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Thomas. Okay, so we've heard from government organizations. So we'll now shift over to agencies framework agencies that governments have set up in support of the fuel cell and hydrogen area. And the first I'd like to call up Gert Turks, who is the program manager for power-based fuels at the Electric Mobility Agency, NOW, in Germany. Gert, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And good afternoon, everyone. Well, that's another. I have another slide actually. While I started, so we do funding for the government. So we do the implementation of a very big program, National Innovation Program for Fuel Cell and Hydrogen, from the Federal Ministry of Transportation. And in the next few minutes, I'd like to show you our vision of the future energy system in Germany. And of course, we have a view from the transportation sector. And I'd like to share some experience we have with ongoing projects. Yeah, that's the one, right? Perfect, thank you. So basically, this is our idea of the future energy system. So we want to, of course, bring in renewables to every sector. For that, we need an energy system which is integrated, which is very flexible, which is connected on every level. So basically, this is the idea, and it comes from our main focus from the transportation sector. So we saw that we will get a problem to bring in such amounts of renewable energy to the transportation sector just by direct power. So right now in Germany, we have about 30% renewable energies in the grid. And we think of an energy carrier which can fit to every application in the future where we can't use direct power. So that can be transportation in the heavy-duty applications for buses. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, we have industries, we have heat sector. So we think we will get a problem with only rely on direct power. Hydrogen is, in that focus, hydrogen will be the next step after direct power. Then comes hydrogen, then maybe synthetic fuels like liquid fuels. But in the first step, it is hydrogen, and you can use hydrogen for many, many applications. And that's why we have a focus on that. So what we've learned from ongoing projects, well, the problem is that from a technical point of view, we want this energy system, but we have the problem we don't have a political framework which fits to this idea, actually. We don't have a framework where we can be flexible, where we can integrate energy carriers to every sector. So actually, that's one of the biggest problems in Germany right now, so the political framework on the one side. For transportation, on the other side, we have a very small market for hydrogen, or let's say we don't have a market for hydrogen in the transportation sector, and that's why no one wants to produce hydrogen as a fuel, right? So even if you have a functional political framework, you will need a market. And to get there, it's very important that we do collaborations, that we work together, that we found ways to combine different sectors, different industries, different applications, actually, and that's what we see in ongoing projects. Like we have a very good project right now for trains, and for these trains you have a very specific amount of hydrogen which you will need. You have a plannable amount of hydrogen, and we see that on these projects where we combine different applications, different industries, the hydrogen idea can actually be applied. So I'm very glad that so many people from different industries are here today, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Gert. Okay. Next, I'd like to call up Bart Bieboek. Sorry. Bart is the Executive Director of the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. It is the agency that the European Commission. So, Bart, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. I'm very happy to be here to present what we are doing on the European level. Also, I would like to congratulate IRENA with this very good study, and looking forward to read it all over again. First of all, who we are the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, and we are actually a private-public partnership, the PPP. We have three main partners, and on the one hand, already Tim mentioned, is the European Commission, which contributes half of the budget. On the other hand, we have the private partner, which is Hydrogen Europe, the industry, and they are about 130 companies. And very important here to mention is that 50% of those companies are SMEs, so innovators, real innovators. On the other hand, we have another private partner, which are the Hydrogen Europe Research. It's about 68 to 70 research organizations, universities all across Europe. And together, we have just a common objective, and our objective is to develop the fuel cells and hydrogen products as fast as possible and to bring them onto the market by 2020. So far, we have subsidized or supported 227 projects across Europe. There are some projects outside of Europe, but the main are in Europe. And this for a total amount of money of 844 million euro. Very important to mention here also that the private side contributed with a little bit more, even 886 million euros. So we have about 1.8 billion euros now invested in this technology. So we have two main pillars in our program, which is the transport side and the energy side. And the budget goes basically 50-50 to each of them. But also we have an important pillar, a horizontal pillar, which we call cross-cutting pillar. It's all about standardization, awareness building, and education. Next slide. So I want to focus here a little bit on electrolyzers because we touched upon that already a little bit. And we have worked already since more than 10 years on improving our electrolyzers. We worked on reducing the cost, but also at the same time to improve the efficiency. And here you can see a chart actually showing the improvement that has been made. So when we started back in 2011, there we developed electrolyzers on a kilowatt scale. So that was very small, 100 kilowatt, 150 kilowatt, and that was already a challenge for the industry, to be very honest. Well, today we are now, because this year we will fund or grant a project which will have a 20 megawatt PEM electrolyzer. So you will see that in a very short term, only in 8 years, we move from a kilowatt scale to a megawatt scale. And actually in the middle you can see one of our projects, which call it H2 Future. This is a project in Austria. It's in the steel industry where we will put basically a 6 megawatt electrolyzer there to produce what we say clean steel. Also this week, actually maybe some of you might have seen it, we launched actually a 1.2 megawatt electrolyzer in Denmark, where we really use the wind electricity, and we produce the hydrogen, and this will supply various sectors. So we will show there the sectoral integration. Also on the slide you can see Certify. This is one of our projects where we try to make guarantees of origin for green hydrogen, because I have to say that all our projects have to use green hydrogen. So at first what we did was to sit together with all the industry and try to agree on a common definition, what is green hydrogen. And we reached that definition, and now the next step is that we are making a kind of book and claim system, so really guarantees of origin. And we do that actually to give more value to the green hydrogen, so in order to valorize it, the green hydrogen, because we have to admit that today still green hydrogen is a little bit more expensive than the gray hydrogen. So we need to find ways how we can push the green hydrogen and how we can valorize the green hydrogen. And this is a project. Actually, we have 4 pilot plants, and you can see there also the partners. We have one in Germany, one in France, one in the Netherlands, and in Belgium, where we will start to book. And actually, you can already today buy these guarantees of origin. We finished that, and it's just starting now So those who would like to learn more about this, you can always contact us. Also, I put some brochures from our FCHJU here outside the room, so you can always look into that and contact us later. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Bart. Great. And thank you for that clarification on the role that both government and industry has played. The 50-50 is a very important contribution in partnership that has gone on in Europe and elsewhere, but especially in Europe. So that's great. Thank you for that. So next, I'd like to turn our focus now to some industry applications and broaden from the grid, which is the tendency to discuss here at IRENA, at the IRENA event, which is understandable. First, we'll go for the transportation sector, then we'll do an industrial application, and then the built environment. So I'd like to turn next to Ferry France from Toyota. Ferry, you have the floor.
So also warm welcome from my side. I think we did already a quite good marketing and PR job, because whenever you talk about hydrogen in transportation sector, it's always linked by now with Toyota, and I think that's at least a good signal. My name is Ferry Franz, and I work as director for Toyota Motor Europe, and I'm heading the group representative office here in Germany, in Berlin. We started quite early to look for green transportation solutions. So we started already in the 1995 with the Prius. We started the development of the Prius already in the late 80s. And in 1996, we started already with hydrogen. So our first prototype was dated in 1996. And the background is that we tackled this topic already in 1992 when we issued our Toyota Earth Charter, where we tried to bridge our ideas, what could transportation support for a better environment. And that became even more, with figures and facts and figures, and that's our Toyota Challenge 2050, issued 3 years ago. And there you can see that our target is to have new vehicles with zero CO2 in 2050, and even more important, also for the life cycle and also in the production. So that's a quite ambitious target, but I think what you have seen with the Prius or with our hybrid technology, we focus on the topic and then we try to achieve everything. So we needed for the first million, just as an example, for the first million hybrid cars, we needed 10 years. For the last million, less than 10 months. And of course, that's also the target, to have this scale effect with hydrogen. We see all the technologies each side by side. So for the very small cars and also for commuting activities in cities, we see a chance for battery electric vehicles. We focus, of course, still on hybrid and plug-in hybrid, because that's the background of all of our technology. But as soon as it comes to longer distances and also for classic transportation, for delivery trucks, buses, and classical trucks, and also for bigger cars, we think that fuel cell and hydrogen is the most appropriate technology for the future. And I think the background for this is also that we are not only producing cars, trucks, and buses. We are a company that has also a big share in hydrogen systems for domestic use. We have a company dealing with H2 forklifts, and therefore we think that the hydrogen society is the next coming big bang in our industry. And we hope that we can convince most or some of other players to join this. I think we have seen the effect already in the Hydrogen Council, where besides Toyota, many other manufacturers are joining. And so as soon as the others will also get into production, we see an acceleration of this topic. That's very short, because I think we are late in time. And now, again.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ferry. It is interesting, the leadership role and the engagement by the government of Japan and industry, the corporations of Japan, globally on the hydrogen file. It's very good to see and very interesting to see as well. So thank you for that. So next, the next industrial sector that I'd like to look at here is the steel sector. And I'd like to call on Rudolf Zollner, the head of Hydrogen Center at Verbund Solutions. Rudolf?
Thank you very much, Tim. Yeah, very warm welcome from my side as well. My name is Rudolf Sauner and I work for an Austrian utility for Verbund. In Austria, the electricity is generated to 70% by renewables, so we already have a very high renewables share, mostly from hydroelectric power, and the company I work for, Verbund, is a hydroelectric company. And the target by the government is to have by 2030 100% renewable electricity in Austria. So I think we're very much forward in that. And therefore, Verbund has decided to go a step further. Yeah, we are a green electricity producer. About 96% of our electricity is produced renewable from hydro, wind, and solar. We are an operator of pumped storage power plants, so we understand storage, and we're the largest provider of grid and balancing services in Austria, and said, well, we have to take a step further and we try to do more with the green electricity that we produce, and let's make green hydrogen for the industry, for SMEs, for automotive applications, and use the electrolyzers also for stabilizing the grid, for providing grid services. So this is the reason why we actually went into hydrogen, into producing green hydrogen. And the first sector that we actually tackled was the steel industry. If we have a look at the worldwide steel industry, we see that globally around 1.6 billion tons of steel are produced annually, about 10% of this in the European Union, and per ton of steel, about 2 tons of CO2 are emitted. And therefore, the iron and steel industry accounts globally for around 30% of the industrial CO2 emissions. So it's a really big player to tackle, yeah, in terms of reduction of CO2. In the steel industry, the CO2 is produced from the process, yeah, because we use carbon-based feedstocks like carbon, coke, or natural gas as a reducing agent. And the only green reducing agent that could replace this carbon dioxide forming fossil reducing agents is green hydrogen. However, this comes at a cost. The current route, if we say this is 100% of production costs, with a direct reduction with green hydrogen, the costs go up by about 80%. Yeah? However, if we really take this 2-degree targets seriously, the only way to replace carbon in the steel industry is by using green hydrogen. This also means a huge demand of green electricity, not only when the wind blows and the sun shines, but 24/7. And this is, of course, a very good opportunity for us as a hydro company. Therefore, we initiated a project which has been luckily funded by the joint undertaking, which has been presented just by Bart Biebeck. It's called H2 Future, where we'll install a 6-megawatt PEM electrolyzer at the steelworks in Linz at voestalpine. And the project has already started. We are just now building the electrolyzer and then have a 26-month test period coming up. The project budget is around 18 million. We have 12 million funding from the EU. Project duration is 4.5 years, and we are now 1.5 years into the project. Of course, we want to design and install this electrolyzer and integrate it in the production of the steelmaking process and provide hydrogen as a reducing agent for the steel industry. In the 26-month demonstration period of the electrolyzer system, we will also do grid services. We pre-qualify the electrolyzer for primary, secondary, tertiary reserve. And the long-term goal, of course, is replacing coal and coke by green hydrogen. I think it's a EU flagship project. It's quite a big project, draws a lot of attention. We also have a website if you want to learn more about this project. And needless to say, this is my favorite hydrogen project in the world. I just saw this project, this question coming up. Yeah. What we see is, because I'm also the project coordinator of this project, yeah, there's a large demand of green electricity 24/7 for these applications. Yeah. We see that grid services will play an important role, and therefore we pre-qualify the electrolyzer for ancillary services. We see that we can draw additional revenues from intraday and spot markets, yeah? But still it's a hard way to get hydrogen cost competitive in the steel industry, and therefore this is also probably the message to the policymakers. I think there's some work needed. And as my last slide, I would like to show you another project that we're currently doing. It's the worldwide first hydrogen-operated narrow-gauge railway in a touristic region in Austria. Yeah? The train is operated currently by diesel, and it will be replaced by a hydrogen train. The train has already been ordered, and we as Verbund, we have a number of hydroelectric power stations in this valley, and therefore we will supply direct green electricity with electrolyzers to make green hydrogen for the operation of these trains. So we'll operate these trains on crystal clear water from the valley. So this is the idea. I think it's a very nice story, and the very essential thing here is that I think this is one of the really early business cases for sector coupling using green hydrogen, which doesn't need any additional funding. So this is one of the business cases. Many people say, green hydrogen, it will come in 10 years, 20 years or so. But here a few things come together. We can produce hydrogen locally. We do not have to go via the grid, so there are no grid fees or anything. And we can, we have a direct coupling with the transport sector, with the rail here. So ideal case for, business case for green hydrogen. So with this, I would like to close my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Rudolf. That was great. And it's, I note with interest, Austria, as the presidency of the Union, is taking distinct interest in hydrogen and its linkage to a clean energy system. So that's very interesting. Very good. Just want to make a note that René Peters is not able to join us. He had a family emergency. So our last presentation to open the panel will be by Dan Sadler. Dan is the program director for the H21 project and part of the LEADS program. And it'll be, I think this will be a bit of a teaser, and I look forward to the questions. And we do have a number of them up on the board already. Please pose some more. In the interim, Dan, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks to IRENA for inviting me to speak today. So like Tim said, I'm the director for the H21 project, and I don't have anywhere near enough time to walk you through that project today. There is a film, it's good family viewing if anybody wants to watch it via the internet. But the project was based on reusing the gas grids and converting them to 100% hydrogen. What we proved is that the grid is the right capacity to do that with technology available today. So you can see all the detail on the project. It's worth pointing out that we're a grid operator. So we don't buy and sell gas. We have no vested interest in where we get the gas from. But as engineers, we have to be practical about the solutions that we put forward. So what I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about is scale and why we selected what we selected. So this is a graph that's pretty common to most countries. It varies slightly, but the red line's electric, the blue line's heat, and the grey line's transport. So this is typically UK annual energy, and the UK uses on average 1,500 terawatt hours. And if you're not familiar with your terawatts and your gigawatts, that's a million watt hours. It's a lot of energy. And that's split roughly between 20% electric, 40% heat, and heat is provided almost entirely by natural gas in the UK because of this huge interseasonal swing in demand, winter to summer. And then about 40% oil, which is transport. And the challenge, currently in the UK, we're at about 83 terawatt hours renewable. So you do hear people say we're at 25%. Well, that's 25% of the red line, which is 5%. So remember the challenge of the Climate Change Act, which is how we enshrine the Kyoto Agreement in law in the UK, is to reduce emissions by 80%. So we're a long way off. And as someone who's spent 20 years building large energy infrastructure projects, I equate the challenge of decarbonising all that to an 80% level to rebuilding your house and everything in it by next Friday. So the H21 project, we've moved it on now, and in November we're going to release a H21 North of England project, because the Leeds City Gate project, we would never convert Leeds. People often think it's about Leeds, but it's not. It's about energy and heat and decarbonisation. And so the North of England project is what could form a first policy for UK government by probably earliest 2023. And that's based on a conversion strategy, and this project's in collaboration with Equinor, formerly Statoil and Cadent. And it's what could form a potential strategy, a conversion of 3.7 million metre points using the gas grid. That includes Liverpool, Manchester, Bradford, Leeds, Hull, York, Middlesbrough, Newcastle. That's 85 terawatt hours of annual demand just for heat in that region. So for heat plus transport and electric, it's around 210 terawatt hours of energy just that region needs. So we've designed a system where we have hydrogen production on the coast, which is based on autothermal reforming of natural gas with carbon capture and storage. The production facility we've designed is 12 gigawatt, 12,000 million watts. There's a commissioning and modular build delivery strategy in the report, and then Statoil have designed the carbon capture and storage system off the coast, which is able to scale up to 20 million tonnes by 2035. So the aim is that we'd convert that region by between 2028 and 2035. Now, not only do you decarbonise heat if you do that, if you think about the comments on chicken and egg, well, actually what you're doing is you use an established customer base, an established system. You're guaranteeing low carbon footprint. It's a below 50 grams per kilowatt hour decarbonisation project, guaranteed. But what you've actually done is you've given bulk availability of hydrogen at point of use based on the government's biggest problem, which is heat, and that then allows you to help decarbonise transport, because you can have fueling stations where you want, and also electric through decentralised generation, so micro CHP in the home, maybe as a next generation, and also centralised generation, so potentially converting power stations from natural gas to hydrogen. So just to finish off, I mean, I get confused with it, and I spend a lot of time looking at it. So I thought it would just worth, it maybe helps the debate, putting the scale of energy in context, because people use gigawatts and megawatts and terawatt hours, and no one's a clue what they're talking about most of the time. I don't mean the people who are saying it, but I mean the general audience. It gets lost because the numbers are so quick. So just to put into context, the North of England project is 85 terawatt hours. And that's an annual demand, so that's like the distance you'd travel in a car over a year. Yeah? That's 85 million watt hours. That's what we need just for heat. And that's not on a nice flat curve that's doing this. So we have to store summer, use winter. So we base that on an average production of 9.7 gigawatts. That's 1,000 million watts. But that's the speed the car's travelling. Yeah? Now, the North of England is actually based on 12.15 gigawatt production. And to put that into context, 12.15 gigawatts is 1,200 times larger than 10 megawatts. And 10 megawatts is 10 million watts. Yeah? So this is the scale we're talking about. So if you're talking about a 10 megawatt electrolyser, you need 1,200 of those, and you need the associated renewables to produce such a low carbon system. And the supply chain for that doesn't exist yet. Hopefully it will do, but it doesn't yet, and that's why we've selected this technology, because it's available today at scale. If it's 150 megawatt, just to carry that theme on, is still 80 times bigger. So that's the scale of energy we need. That's just heat in the UK. And then just to put into context, I think someone's removed the picture for some reason, but just to put that into context, the North of England requires, just the North of England, 8 terawatt hours of interseasonal storage. And when we talk about storage, gas storage and electric storage, they're both relevant, but they're not comparable. So the Australian mega battery, which is the world's biggest battery, it's important for a bit of demand-side response in Oz. That's 129 megawatt hours. And just for the North of England, we need 62,000 of those to provide the equivalent storage. So that's why we've selected a system of hydrogen based on low-carbon scalable technology. And the thing that I'd probably leave you with is a comment that says the Kyoto Agreement is 2050. And if we're going to hit that agreement, which I hope we all want to do because of the climate change challenge, then we have to use credible, scalable technology that's available today and guarantee those carbon savings. The Paris Agreement is to then transition to zero. So my view is that what we need to do is we need to use hydrogen as a potential destination fuel. It's not a transition fuel. And the carbon capture and storage element of that transition, of that destination, is the transitional element. Because in the back end of the century, as global renewables develop, and we have to trade energy in a vector that's transferable, which is hydrogen as ammonia, then what we can do is start to back out our reliance on CCS and move to an entirely balanced, sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Dan. And the reason, part of the reason, of course, for aside from great innovative new thinking on the use of hydrogen, is just to get a sense of the scale that will be required in this transition to a clean energy system across the economy. So now the floor is opened up for questions. I would like to draw on your questions there. I see the number one question is around the energy efficiency of electrolyzers and the importance of improving that. I don't know, Bart, you raised that as a key success story, and maybe you could talk a little bit more about that and your views around that. And obviously others, if you have views, please join in.
Well, yeah. During the 10 years research that we did, we focused also very much on the efficiency. And I can say that actually when we were maybe a couple of years ago around 70% or something, we are now, and actually this is the project that, the steel project actually in Austria, will go about 80 to 82% efficiency. And this is really very, very high and necessary as well, because we need to reduce the costs. And so if we can produce more hydrogen with less electricity, that's of course very good to make the TCO running, because as already mentioned by a previous speaker, is that it's still very challenging, the cost of hydrogen for these big industries like in steel.
Any other comments?
The H2 Future project was mentioned in terms of costs as well. For driving the costs down, of course, the operation of the electrolyzer is very important as well. And for this steel project, we have a new generation of electrolyzer which actually works at atmospheric pressure. So it's not a pressure vessel that works under elevated pressures. And this is also a measure how we can bring down capex, the costs, capital costs for the electrolyzer per megawatt. And I think this will be for the future very important, to reduce the costs. The efficiency, we already have almost reached a kind of a plateau. There is incremental improvement possible, I think, but in terms of capex, I think there will be still quite significant reductions in the next years.
Okay. So we see a lot of interest in bringing down the capex costs, as you said. So I would say right now, because we have this 80%, right now it's more like scaling up, and to scale up, we need to bring down capex. And if you want to increase efficiency, the capex goes up. So right now it's more for the near future, the focus is on bringing down capex costs and not efficiency, because we are at a very good point, actually. We're ready for business models with this efficiency, actually.
Maybe just to add is that actually the biggest cost of the green hydrogen is actually today the cost of electricity. So the capex, yes, is important. And of course, if you have a small electrolyzer like 500 kilowatt or 1 megawatt, of course, there the capex plays a bigger role. But once you go really into 20 megawatt or even higher, there, of course, the capex starts to become less important, but the cost of electricity. And then, of course, the second part of the question is that in future, if the electricity become, well, close to zero, marginal cost, of course, that will help. And at that time, okay, that the business case will fly. But maybe just to add also on is that, as I mentioned today, we are in a megawatt scale, and the mission innovation, which was launched in May this year in Denmark, actually the challenge is there now to go to the gigawatt scale. So that's our next big challenge.
Just to add a small figure, the electricity represents between 70 and 80% of the levelized cost of hydrogen, just electricity. And in big plants, of course, the capex is not a thing. Even water is not a thing. So,
okay. Another question that has come in is electrolysis flexible enough to respond to the renewable energy generation? And I think this is part of the question. We all think of the old alkaline, and is there, is it getting to the point now where the combination of renewable energies with the electrolyzers respond appropriately?
I think I can comment on that, because we are testing this in our project. We also have the Austrian TSO involved, who does the pre-qualification of the electrolyzer. Also for frequency controls, we will have a direct line to the TSO and have it directly connected and prove these services. And actually, with the electrolyzer that we're using with a previous generation, it has already been proven that it is suitable for frequency control. Therefore, with this PEM electrolyzer technology, we are very confident that we can do that. But having said that, I think we should also consider that there are probably other technologies like batteries that are also very suitable for frequency control. Yeah? And I see grid services and balancing services of electrolyzers more on the long-term time scale, yeah? Grid balancing in terms of seasonal balancing, yeah? And also probably of supplying larger energies within a longer period of time. So not only the short-term services, because there will be a lot of competition with other technologies in the future, but it's also more probably the shifting of energy over longer periods of time.
Great. Kurt?
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good point. It's, as I said, we need a flexible energy system, so we have to use the right technology at the right place, right? So it's not that we want only hydrogen, it's that we want hydrogen as an option. And right now in Germany, it's actually not possible to use electrolyzers, to use hydrogen because of the political framework. So it's more like we have to open the path to do it. And for different applications, like let's say batteries for short-term hydrogen, for long-term storage. So we need all of these options.
Maybe just to answer on the policy, because that's a very, very important point. I think at the moment, so far, the electrolyzers did not went really to scale. So we had some demonstration project, we'd end up in capacity, but the scale was not there. So recently, the European Commission is now working very hard on this Renewable Energy Directive. And inside the Renewable Energy Directive, that will be addressed. And normally, we will be able to go at scale once this is voted on. And also next year, the new gas directive that is being made now on the European Commission will also include green hydrogen normally. So that will all help to lever the market.
Great. Dan, yeah, on this or the next question?
Well, no, I just wanted to add to this. When we're talking about storage and things like blending into gas grids and things like this and the scale and things, I mean, we need to put time into context. You know, I mean, like I said, 30 years, you know, across Europe we need terawatts and terawatts and terawatts. Just to put it into context, you hopefully all saw in the news the world's biggest wind farm off Cumbria in the UK opened today. You know, that'll produce an annual amount of maybe 3 terawatt hours. So, you know, we need 85 just for heat in just the north of England. So we also need to be sure with our futures that we can produce the amount of renewables locally to supply that green hydrogen, because, you know, the world's biggest wind farm is not that big when you put it into the context of large energy. And the other point is that when you're blending into the gas grids, ultimately 100%, that unlocks everything, because you can blend as much as you want. Anyway, you've got constrained energy. It's got to be better to gather 60% than lose 100%. But, you know, 20% blend into the gas grid is a 6% energy saving. It's a 6% carbon saving. Well, Kyoto's 80%, Paris is 0. So you have to set strategies that are long-term, but you have to use technologies that are deliverable short-term, so that market push, retrospective market pull.
Okay, great. Actually, I'm going to go on to the bottom one here. If hydrogen is transported in steel pipes, and I'm looking to you, Dan, what research has been done, well, and others, of course, but to start with, what research has been done on hydrogen embrittlement? And maybe you could broaden that to the scale and scope of the work that's underway now and the issues that you've come across.
Okay, so the first hydrogen transmission pipeline were built in France in 1938, still operational. It's not a question of can you put it in steel pipes, it's have you designed your pipe with the correct steel. So that's not an issue. This is proven technology. The thing that we're working on proving at the moment is whether you can convert the existing transmission system in the UK to hydrogen. But actually the transmission system is less important, because you have to build a new transmission system, and the bulk of the users are on the distribution system, which is below 7 bar, where no embrittlement problems exist, and it's a predominantly polyethylene system. So the H21 project is about converting the below 7 bar system off a new transmission system, which you have to do so you can incrementally convert. If you think you're bringing hydrogen in, you're backing methane out. And then retrospectively converting your transmission system as a huge storage medium over time. So there is no embrittlement issue with steel as long as you've selected the right steel. And there's lots of evidence to suggest that the pressures we're operating and the way we cycle the pipelines, it'd be thousands of years before you get an embrittlement in existing steel. So that's the high pressure answer. It's just worth mentioning that in the UK, on the back of the H21 project now, we've got £50 million worth of projects. One's government-led. It's a project I designed for the UK government whilst I was seconded there. It's called the High for Heat programme, and that programme will conclude in 2021. And the aim of that programme is to provide all the safety-based evidence downstream of the meter. There's lots of anecdotal evidence as well as real evidence to suggest that hydrogen represents a comparable risk to natural gas. It's also providing capital stimulus to the appliance market, and Worcester, Bosch and Baxi have already commissioned a 100% hydrogen boiler. And then my team are running a £15 million project proving the safety case in the network. We're just building 2 big testing facilities, one at the Health and Safety Labs in Buxton and one up at Spade Adam, which is where most of the world's evidence for gas safety comes from. And we're going to quantify the risk of converting the gas networks to hydrogen. Both those projects will complete in 2021. All the indicators are exceptionally positive, and at that point there are no remaining barriers to a hydrogen conversion other than political will.
Okay, great. Next question. Favorite hydrogen project, I think is a little bit of a leader, but anyway, the challenges we'll wait to the end. And there was synthetic, as an energy carrier, this is something, and Gert, you referenced it to a degree where you keep the electrons. When the electrons in the system, then you go to hydrogen, and then after the hydrogen, potentially you step then to another carrier medium. And I guess the question here is competing solutions for hydrogen as the energy carrier. Whether it's competing, maybe you could talk a little bit if you see it as competing or complementary as you go kind of through the tiers. I think, although we don't have a representative from Australia, but there is some questions around the most efficient and effective way to transport hydrogen over long distances, non-pipeline distances. But maybe you could talk a little bit about the synthetic carriers as well.
Well, yeah. So we have a look on that actually, yeah. But the problem is, for every carrier you need hydrogen in the first place. And the problem, especially for Germany, is we haven't done the hydrogen yet. So the hydrogen must be the first step, and then the next carriers can come. But we see a lot of discussion on different carriers like methanol, ammonia, LOHCs. So right now we have a lot of different discussions, and for me, I think it's very important that we have let's say we get to an agreement on an international scale where we want to go, because if we want to export or let's say send energy around the world, it's very important that we have all the same technology which we want to rely on.
Just before you go to liquefied organic hydrogen carrier, LOHC.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's lots of carriers, but I think what you tend to do now at the timescales again, if we go back to that, is use proven technology. The ammonia market more or less didn't exist in the 60s, and in the 70s it went from nothing to 750 terawatt hours. Yeah, and that's because there was a market pull, a demand, fertilizer. So ammonia is shipped around the world already. Ammonia is NH3 for those who don't know. And ammonia is an effective shipping method for hydrogen. It's at low temperature and pressure, so it's easy to manage. 2 million tons shipped around the world. It can be stored in big storage caverns, storage cylinders, just like liquid natural gas. So, you probably don't need to reinvent the wheel there. You're right, you do have to get the hydrogen. You produce ammonia, then you have to crack it back. So there's an energy penalty. But if you're in somewhere where you don't have geological salt, which is the most efficient way to store hydrogen, and you're going to have to use ammonia anyway. But actually, you're going to have to ship ammonia or ship hydrogen some way. You mentioned we don't have a representative from Oz, but I spend quite a bit of time in Australia. The Carbon Net project, for those of you who don't know, is a project looking at producing low-carbon hydrogen from coal gasification, because they don't have enough renewables yet. Even in Australia, they're at net 1%. So they're looking at using coal, lignites, that's what they've got an abundance of in South Australia, sequestering the carbon in the Gippsland Basin and exporting that hydrogen as ammonia to Japan. That's a project that's up and running, announced by the Victoria government. And obviously the ambition in Australia, who can produce 10,000 times more solar than they can ever use, you know, there's nobody lives there virtually for the size of the land, 24 million people on a continent. If they ever want to export that renewables, sort of back out that reliance on CCS and coal, then they're going to have to export it as a vector, and so get to below 80% and then transmission to 100%.
This is more or less what in Chile we want to aim is producing hydrogen from solar energy, which is cheap, it's available, and we have 17% of the last month energy was produced by renewable energies. So, and as I said, we should. Our aim is to bottle and then to ship it away to countries that have less renewable resources, less land availability, to aim to the sustainable development goals. So it's possible by ammonia because, as you said, the market is already there. You can use that carriers first, and then it's on development how to carry hydrogen in high and low temperature, cryogenic or so. So, but I think it should be because, and this is a very key point because it will change all geopolitical system, you know, because today we're trading fossil fuels, and I really hope that in the future we trade hydrogen from renewables, and that will change everything. It will change all mindsets.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great. I know that Australia just brought out their chief scientist published a report recently. Their leading research institution, Cicero, also on hydrogen from renewables and the strategy for Australia. And there's one other report out, just all within this month, where Australia and other countries, I think, are really looking at the commoditization of hydrogen from renewables, clean hydrogen from various sources, but renewables being a key one of them. Okay, maybe one or two quick, our time's marching and we want to run the poll and see what the results are. For Ferry, opportunity to sell your, yeah, maybe that's it's a given. I think what's the opportunity of doing that? I think your strategy, and Toyota has this plan, and I think that's pretty straightforward. The price of oil, well, $3 US per kilo. Maybe, Bart, you have some numbers. I know that in the US, the reference is if they get at the retail station between $5 and $6 US per kilo is about equivalent to the gasoline equivalent that they're paying for vehicles today. So that's based on the fuel cell stacks and your efficiency, et cetera. But that's kind of if they can get it to between $5 and $6 US per kilo at the pump, that's the target that they're aiming for. And right now, 13, 15, maybe, Bart, you got some numbers?
Well, I think, I don't know exactly the conversion for that one, I should look it up. But normally what we say with 1 kilogram of hydrogen, you can drive 100 kilometers. So I think that's important, and you can then calculate it back to fuel if you want. But yeah, so normally we should be able to produce our green hydrogen to 1.5 euro per kilogram in order to be able then to transport it to the refueling station to reach around 5-6 euro. So this is our target. We are not there yet. We have now some projects which will show that, and the key point is here that you have to do that by putting your hydrogen production facility very close to a big industry player which uses or consumes a lot of hydrogen, because then you can really produce it cheap, and then where you also have a lot of renewable energy. And we think if you have around 22 euro per megawatt hour, if you can get that price about in renewable energy, then you might be able to reach the 1 to 1.5 euro per kilogram if you go over 20 megawatt electrolyzer. So that's a bit the figures.
Okay, and the idea of cluster and get it near these major demanders, I think is a theme that a number of countries are looking at. Port facilities, mining facilities, those kinds of things where you have a large demand that then you can bleed off in the long term, as Dan mentioned, once you get the system in place for other reasons, then you can start to apply it to different sectors as well. So we're moving toward the conclusion. I think that I have two requests. One is first, well, you can throw in your favorite hydrogen project if you like, if you do have one, where you think it's appropriate. But I think the two requests I have now is key challenge that you see coming forward in the short, medium term. You can pick which kind of time frame. And then the recommendation, and I'm thinking for IRENA and for others, what would be your recommendation of work or things to focus on or to do in marrying up the renewable energies, clean hydrogen in that space? And so if you want to throw in your favorite project in that as well. Maybe we'll do a quick round across the table, across the floor here. Hashimoto-san, I'm not sure if you'd like to start with that, and then and we'll just go across, and then we'll do, everybody's got their app ready. We'll do the poll once again and just check out our numbers, but first we'll do a run through the panel here. Hashimoto-san.
発言の機会ありがとうございます。私、地方公共団体の人間がこの場に呼ばれた意義っていうものを考えてまして、それはですね、福島、先ほど話ありましたように7年半前の原子力発電所の事故があって、そこからいかに復興しているか、それをですね皆さんにお伝えをする。で、その柱がまさに水素社会の実現になってくるのかなというふうに思ってまして、この場で私が発言することは、先ほど申し上げたのは国のプロジェクトなんですが、福島県は国、それから産業界、それから県民といいますか国民の方々と一緒になって水素社会実現のために頑張っていきたいと、そういうことをこの場で宣言をしたいというふうに思ってます。で、課題はやはり県民、それから人々のですね水素社会、水素の大切さについての理解を深めることだと思っています。そのために我々はさまざまな機会を使って広報したいと思っています。でプラスぜひ福島にこれだけのデモンストレーションをやってますので、ぜひそちらにですね多くの国々から参加をいただいて連携をして、で福島の復興だけではなくて日本の未来、世界の未来を開いていきたいなというふうに思っています。答えになってません、課題ではありませんけれども、福島の思いをちょっとお話をさせていただきました。
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to make the remarks in the final closing. I'm representing the local municipality of Fukushima Prefecture, and the reason why I'm here is to communicate how much of the progress we've made as a Fukushima Prefecture, where 7.5 years ago, the natural disaster and the Great East Japan earthquake hit our local communities and devastated, and how much of the recovery we've made. And now we've set out this the project working towards the realization of the hydrogen-based society. So we've come this far to try to contribute to the world by realizing this challenge. And together with the national parties. So this is actually a national project, and also the industry engagement, and also the citizens all coming together to be engaged in this great national project. So taking this opportunity, I'd like to say that we are committed to this work towards this realization of a hydrogen-based society. And I also like to say that on behalf of the Fukushima Prefecture, our the commitment is to communicate the importance of hydrogens and the value of hydrogen. And so that education efforts needs to be made through our engagement with the community. And so we have showcased a lot of the achievement through this national project, and we would like to invite all the members present today and come to Fukushima and see hands-on our projects, and hopefully we can work together towards a great future, not only for Fukushima but with Japan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thomas?
Well, first, the challenge, or I think several. First, technological challenge, market challenge. So market challenge, you will need to aim to giga scales. We'll need to further market because the size of the market will help to lower the price. The technological challenge I think they're aimable. Political challenge, we need to prepare the policymakers to be prepared to this technological change. Social acceptance, and that should be the challenge. And the recommendations. I was thinking today with this conversation that is usually in renewables we start to talking about renewables. We start with solar photovoltaics. We talk about wind energy, and we forget about thermal energy. And we start to just about electricity and electricity here and electricity that. And this is the first time that I see a vector or a technology that today is hydrogen that is connecting these two worlds that usually are disconnected when you're talking in the politics of the government or in the municipal level or global level. So I think this is a very good thing, and the recommendation I think that we should work together. But this is the only way that we can aim the targets, the prices, and what we should. I think every time that I look at your face and the public, everyone saying yes or being happy about it. So I think we all believe that we can aim at this renewable premium hydrogen production for the world and for all our economies.
Great, thank you. Gert?
Well, for me, it's not really technological problems. Actually, it's more like, well, I see two big things. It's political framework and it's the market. So we have to find a way to, establish the idea of this integrated, efficient energy system in the political framework. That accounts especially for Germany, but also for the rest of the world. And the second thing, we talked about large scale, and I think it got clear that we think, when we think about hydrogen, we think very big. We need it for the large scale applications. And that makes it very hard to start on a small scale, right? So that's actually the problem which we have right now. We need it for a large scale, but we are at the very beginning. So as you said, I think collaborations, working together, find projects where different industry, different countries come together and show that we can do it actually, is for me, it's the right way. And I think we should support that.
Okay, great, thank you. Bart?
So yeah, I agree that I think technologically wise, we already achieved quite a lot, and we should not stop. Of course, we need to do continuous research to improve it further. But I think we reached a stage now we can really go into commercialization, let's say, really deployment. But scale, that's for me the first big challenge. We have to go to scale, and in a way, the technology improvement went faster than actually the policy. So today we are now ready with the products, but the policy is not ready. So we really need to work on that. We're doing that. And that's the second challenge, I think, is the education. Because since we moved very fast in the technology, a lot of people are not aware where we are today with this technology. So we definitely need to educate not only politicians, but also the society. So there's a huge task in front of the whole hydrogen sector. And the third challenge is actually renewable energy, because you see that hydrogen will be making the sectoral integration. So you will connect the industry, you will connect the heating, you will connect also the transportation, and they all need green molecules or green electrons. And so at the end, I believe there will be a battle for the green electron. So we will need to speed up, also building facilities, more windmills, more solar panels, to create this green electron, which will be needed. I mean, Dan mentioned the numbers.
Yeah. So. Quite so. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have heard a lot of challenges. I think the biggest one for me is at least scale. Because if we can generate some scale, then the politics will have to react. So we have to drive them a little bit by scale. But I think that we have also to take as a kind of opportunity and chance. We are in a unique situation. Today we are in such an early stage of the market that we don't have competitors. So we work more or less, we cooperate, so it's not a competition, at least in the automotive sector, between the brands. We would appreciate more brands coming to the market and sell their hydrogen cars so that we can really have a boost on this. So I think that's a unique situation for all of us. And maybe a favorite project, because it's also a light tower, and I think it's good for marketing. It's the Energy Observer. It's a boat shipping around the world and fully supplied by hydrogen generated from seawater. And it's looking enormous, so it's really fitting to this advanced technology. It's not a boring ship, it's really looking cool. And so therefore this is one of my favorite projects by now.
Great, thanks for that. Rudolf?
Okay, one challenge that has not been said yet is probably to create a market pool for green products. Yeah? When you look at the steel case, I told you that the production costs are around 80% higher than nowadays for normal steel produced with fossil fuels. If you think about your car, it has around 1 ton of steel. 1 ton of steel costs around 500 euros. So the extra cost for the car would be, let's say, 400 euros or so. Are you prepared to pay 400 euros to have a green car? No. Are you prepared to pay 400 euros for electric window closers or any gadget? Yes. And I think there needs to be a change in mindsets, and we need to get our priorities right.
Great. Okay, Dan?
Well, I think we've done scale to death, so I'll say something slightly different. I think a collective common focus on the target would be good. So not short-term carbon budgets, but what's the target? So 2050. And that draws you to a recognition of time and practicality as opposed to just cost. So at the moment, we often compare the costs of the impossible with the costs of the possible. Well, why don't we come up with solutions that we know will work? Because 30 years is no time at all, and things take a long time to build. I think the other thing is system evaluation, as opposed to looking at specific aspects of a system to say, well, what is the carbon footprint of the system? So products don't have a carbon footprint, it's a system. And how practical is it to adapt that system over time, 30 years, and then transition to a longer position. And my final point would be that I think we need to be able to have adult conversations where we remove pre-perceived bias about what's the right and wrong solutions. So there's still a stigma, I think, around areas of the gas industry because there's a lack of understanding, actually, of what gas does in terms of its ability to store energy indefinitely over time and transporting huge quantities. And I think once we remove those barriers, then we can have much better informed conversations and recognise that as much as we need everything, different options have different impacts. And when we all can articulate that message, it will mean that governments can stop playing around the fringes and are forced into real decisions based on time.
Great, thank you very much for that. Okay, now we're almost at the end. Our time is close. If we could get the poll up and running once again. Can we switch over? Everybody's got their app out. Everybody's flipping to the poll section. And here's our first question. Most important role for hydrogen from renewable power in 10 years. If you could go to your app and there we go. Okay. So we'll give you a couple of seconds. While that is underway, I would like to thank all of the panelists very much for your insights. I think it was a great session. It covered a lot of ground. We had the industry, we had the funding agencies and the partnerships that are going on and being developed, and government representation. So while the poll is going on, I'd like for all of you to thank our panelists very much for this afternoon's session. Next question. Okay, next question. And after we get the 4 questions, hopefully we'll be able to project up if there was any changes in views. This is our hope. So this is the 3rd question. Okay, great. And our last. Okay, great. I think we'll, now, can we get a little comparison between the two? The magic, see if it works. So are we stepping our way, oh. Okay, so we're comparing now. So if you could step back then so that we could see, or because we're at the 20 now. So we're renewables in 10 years, and we see decarbonizing transport as the leading one. And in 10 years after the session, do we have it? We're doing the 10 years for seasonal storage. Okay, so transportation, seasonal storage. One more, here we go. And in 20 years, seasonal storage, okay. Even higher, okay. How much will total renewable? 2 to 10, okay. And how much renewable dedicated hydrogen production? Yes, 2 to 10. Okay, so we're in that same space. Very good. And how much renewable? Yeah, in 20 years. Okay, 42. A mix up to 20. And so in fact, expectations are it will be used sooner. More of it will be used sooner. Okay, very interesting. Well, I'd like to thank you all very much. I think that brings us, yes, very much so, to the end of this session. The panelists here, it's a great group of people. I would strongly recommend, if you have other questions, maybe for the next few minutes, I know some have to run quickly, others will be here. I recommend that you buttonhole them and have a conversation with them. And with that, I'd like to draw this to a close. I'd like the panelists, if they could, to please step back up onto the stage for a family photo. So thank you very much, everybody.